Hi folks, just wanted to talk a little bit about some environmental development as we go through our thumbnails. We're thinking about lots of different things. So first of all, rule of thirds, then silhouettes, camera angles, perspective, all that sort of stuff. But what I want to do here is talk a little bit about bad tangents. Okay, so normally I do this by drawing a few little simple things and then going through how you would arrange these so that they're nicely staged, and the space around everything and the interconnectedness of the objects works really well in staging the environment properly. So, little house, the sun, and a hill. Okay, so you've got these three elements. Now this is very, very simple, and I will go through this just fairly simply to start with, and then we'll look over here at different thumbnails that I've done, and also an illustration I did a long time ago, just to show you what good staging is all about, and taking all the elements and put them in places that have their own space and just lets elements breathe, so that we can see different things more clearly. Okay, um, so bad tangents. A lot of people do something like this. Okay, so you've got a hill. Now remember, this is exaggerated and this is fairly simple. You've got a hill, you've got the house, and you've got the sun. Okay, now a bit silly, but say you wanted to put the house on the hill there, and you wanted the sun, just going down like a sunset, and people arrange things like this. So there's the hill, there's the line there of the hill, and the line of the house are sharing lines, and we're not sure whether the sun is sitting on the hill or meant to be behind or in front. Okay, so that is not the right way to do it, obviously. So these areas here are bad tangents. They're areas where lines are shared when they don't need to be shared. So a much better way of doing that is to say do the hill, do your house, okay, do some lines that intersect each other, but there's still plenty of space in here. Okay, so say the house is something like that. Oh. Let me just get a different color. So you do a house like that, it's sitting on the hill, and you do the sun in its own space somewhere else. Okay, so that you know that house is on the hill. Okay, the house is sitting on the hill, the sun is away from the hill. Okay, and you're not getting shared lines or bad tangents here. So very, very simple, and I wouldn't expect people to do that all the time, but we see this quite a lot. Okay, so another way of doing it would be, there's the hill, there's the house, it's actually sitting on the hill, or it's behind the hill, and I mean, you could do the sun like that. Although if you do the sun like that again, you're thinking now, is it stuck on the hill or is it anything else? But then you might fade this off or something like that, and you probably would fade that sun and really sit it off in the distance and make it look like it really is away from that hill. So there's other things you can do, but the point being that you're not sharing lines like this. Okay, so over here I probably would just again put the sun back, and if you're ever going to do that, you'd do something else like fade it or something like that. So bad tangents, not so great over here, much better over here. Okay, so which brings us to this. Now apologies for the resolution here, but it's an old picture I did years ago. So much is happening on here, okay? But the reason that I'm able to put so much of this stuff together is because I'm thinking of tangents all the time, and I'm thinking of staging. Now, looking at this, This was for a client. This was for like a little interactive piece where you clicked on different things. So I didn't fade it as much as I'd like, say those. So, you know, these really should be faded a bit more and things like that, which is another way that you can differentiate between images. But I show this because everything is the same brightness. Everything is using the same graphics, and yet I've got a whole lot of tricks in here to differentiate between objects and different features. So it's almost harder to do that without like fading some things, you know, making this black line fade into the blue a bit more, things like that. So this is how I've done it. So have a look at what I've done with various features here. This doesn't go down to here and touch this line. Okay, so the little dribble here goes above or below that line. All right, it does not touch it. Okay, have a look at all through here. All of this area here is much lighter than this. Okay, and nothing touches here. So this area here just surrounds that arm and pops it forward a little bit. Okay, I am cheating a bit with this white line here, but again, it's vector. It was for an interactive piece where all these pieces needed to look a little flat anyway, so that's okay. But have a look at other places too. This area here, okay. This line goes in there. It doesn't follow that. Okay, so you can see right through here, there's all these areas where I'm not sharing lines. Okay, so there's that there. All right, you get the picture. There's that there. Okay, you can see that this has quite a nice space around it as well. You can see here that this line comes out of here, and right the way through I'm thinking about where all of this goes. So up here as well, etc., etc. All right, you can see up here that yes, I could have put that rocket on top of that hill, but I'm using the same sort of thought process here where it's either below or it's on. I mean, it could be on the hill, but again, it's nice and clear where that thing is sitting. It is sitting on the hill, and that's because there is some space in here. Okay, so you can see right through this there are examples of where I have thought about tangents. Okay, all right, and I've done the best that I can to try and make sure that all these areas sit well within each other. Okay, right, so that is they're bad. So that's me talking about bad tangents and good staging. All right, so hopefully that will help you out a little bit. Just think about that little exercise with the house, the sun, and the hill. And it is exaggerated here, but you know, try doing this and not doing this. Okay. All right. Just to go through these thumbnails, I just want to talk a little bit about how I've used rule of thirds, how I've used silhouettes. I haven't done a lot with camera angles here. I've done a little bit, but I've done stuff with perspective as well. So when we're learning about environments, so far we're looking at rule of thirds, we're looking at silhouettes, we're looking at perspective. There's also another thing here that I want to talk about, and that is hierarchy of line, all right, or grouping things together, all right, and some of that is to do with just some clarity in the illustration. Another part of that is to get distance happening. Okay, so your hierarchy, darker lines somewhere, lighter lines somewhere else, and then you can get some distance getting faked in there. So let's have a look. All right, so the first bit obviously is rule of thirds. Okay, rule of thirds, you divide your composition up into threes, and generally your objects can sit in some of these areas. You can do it this way as well. I usually just do it the one way. You can have your objects sitting in some nice areas, and generally the idea is that they look more interesting at a third of the way across. All right, People like Wes Anderson, you know, will do stuff right in the middle, but it's definitely an artistic choice there. So you can see, rule of thirds, a third of the way. Yep, that's my focal point. I'm using thirds everywhere. Okay, there's my focal point there, and my focal point there. So you can see I've got rule of thirds happening everywhere. Okay, let's have a look at the next one too. So you get my point. Let's have a look. Yep, rule of thirds. You can see I'm using it everywhere. And you can get some interesting results. That's a point of interest there, point of interest there. All right, you know, you could put your character there, nice rule of thirds. So you get the general idea. All right, let's go back to that first one. All right, also silhouettes. Have a look at some of the silhouettes I'm playing with here. And also have a look at the hierarchy. Have a look at where I've got thicker lines, all right? I've got thicker lines here, all right? And look at this. I've got thicker line right around the edge of this stuff. So it really makes this one big group, all right? Now, these are fairly rough, but you know, ideally that should have started thicker and maybe gone to thinner there, but it's not too bad. All right, so I'm looking at some interesting silhouettes here. There's a silhouette here too. So that if you were to color this in like a real silhouette, there would be some interesting shapes in there. Okay, so look at this silhouette here. All right, obviously there's a silhouette there, and I'm incorporating the hills or the little cliffs in with some of the vegetation there as well. Okay, so some nice silhouettes through there. Let's have a look at the other one. So you can see, whereas the first one I'm just really doing some sketching, with the second one I'm adding just really simple areas of shading. Okay, and I'm just doing it sporadically. All right, so there's obviously silhouettes there. Okay, there's some nice silhouettes there if you wanted to add some stuff, but really what I'm doing is maybe it's darker in the background. Okay, and you know, I'm thinking about nice clear silhouettes here as well. All right, I'm also thinking, have a look at this. There are, you know, I'm thinking about tangents right through here as well. Okay, so you know, this is above this, you know, that sort of stuff. So you know, this is not right at the edge there. Okay, so you know, this is sticking up through there. It's not that. So I'm still thinking about silhouettes as well, tangents as well. So rule of thirds, oh, rule of thirds, okay, silhouettes. I'm thinking about hierarchy where some lines are thicker, and I'm grouping some areas together, all right, some really complex areas together with a certain amount of hierarchy. Okay, so slightly thicker lines. Okay, so I am also thinking about perspective here, all right, and the obvious one here is 1 point perspective here. All right, so I'm pushing everything here. All right, I don't really use lines, so sometimes I could be a little more accurate, but generally that is 1 point perspective there. You can see here I've done perspective as well, and what I've tried to do is, see, that could be better. So this thing up here should be a little higher, but generally I've put some perspective in to some of these illustrations. Okay, so think about tangents, okay, and how, think about tangents and how I'm positioning things in here. Just think about like this bit here, it's not touching the line, it's above or it's below, okay? Think of that simple thing there. Have a think about perspective, have a think about silhouettes, have a think about your rule of thirds, okay? And generally, I haven't really tried many camera angles here, but you could have your camera low or high or whatever. But yeah, you could think about slightly different camera angles as well. Okay. So, just to finish this off, the last thing I will talk about is how I've achieved distance here, and that'll be more techniques that we use as you're doing your final environment. But the really nice thing about that is that once you've done your final environment, if you can get it done early enough, we can start playing around with the layers themselves, so that you can see here I've got a few different techniques in here and how I've achieved distance. Okay, so number one, you can see here that this has been done all with triangles. I've tried circles here, but number one, I've achieved distance with thicker lines here and thinner lines here. Okay, or darker lines here and lighter lines here. I've achieved distance over here with differences in color. Okay, so it's black here, and every time it goes back it's lighter, so it's a lighter grey. So it's black here, lighter grey, really lighter grey. I've used size here as well, so same looking sort of tree, really, really big, really, really small. Alright, so opacity, colour, size. Alright, that's how I've achieved distance. Okay, similar sort of stuff here. Alright, here I've got even these craters are in perspective, but you've got size of crater, size of crater, size of crater. Alright, so that gets smaller and smaller. Alright, you could say these rings as well just get smaller. And ideally, you could probably do some nice, just getting smaller and smaller like that. Okay, so just to finish off as well, this is nice to give you a certain amount of scale. Do a few birds in the sky. These are, even if they're big birds, this is bigger. So, a few things to think about when you're going through your exercises and when you're finalizing your different layers. Think about some of that stuff as you're doing your thumbnails and your final environment. Get stuck into your rule of thirds, your perspective, your silhouettes, different camera angles, and think about your staging and how you show distance. So just muck about with a lot of that stuff and just practice that, of course.